Welcome everyone to our webinar on applying the elements of agroecology to agroforestry, transforming food systems for a more sustainable and resilient world. And thank you for joining us from all around the globe. I'm Elaine Springay. I'm the agroforestry officer at FAO based in Rome headquarters. And today we hope to have a dynamic discussion and have some wonderful panelists and speakers with us today. So we invite you as participants to be part of the discussions. Please use the Q&A function, and we will try our best to respond to your comments and questions in due time. So without further ado, I would like to invite the Deputy Director of FAO's Forestry Division, Tina Vahanen, to provide some opening remarks. Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you and Edmundo and all the other colleagues for actually organizing this webinar. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from today. On behalf of FAO based here in Rome, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar and panel discussion that will address the ways in which applying the elements of agroecology to agroforestry can really maximize agroforestry's contribution to the transition towards sustainable food systems. Many of you may already know that FAO has a new strategic framework that guides us, for example, on how FAO works towards making agricultural and forestry production, the environment, people's nutrition, and people's lives better. This is what we call the 4 betters in FAO and in our new strategic framework. And just as today's challenges are constantly evolving, so is FAO and our Forestry Division. The Forestry Division leads FAO's work in promoting sustainable forest management and providing leadership on the environmental, social, and economic dimensions of forestry, including its contributions to poverty reduction and food security and nutrition. For instance, trees represent key pathways for supporting economic and environmental recovery in today's context, especially since they are central to tackling the interconnected issues of, for example, halting deforestation due to agricultural expansion, reversing land degradation, and restoring ecosystems. Agroforestry is an important area of work that bridges, in fact, FAO's work on agriculture and forestry. And a good example of this is, in fact, that this webinar today is co-hosted by both our plant production and protection and our forestry divisions. So we work together on this. As you well know, agroforestry can be generally defined as the intentional integration of trees with agriculture. But this only paints a broad picture of a system that can actually represent an immense variety of land uses and practices. Our work on agroforestry aims to recognize this diversity by emphasizing the importance of enabling conditions, context-specific solutions, and capacity building for agroforestry, always tailor-made to the country and local needs. So no blueprint, no one fits for all solutions. In addition to providing technical support to the implementation of agroforestry projects around the world, FAO is prioritizing the development of learning and training materials and support to national agroforestry policies and strategies to really ensure that agroforestry systems are adapted to farmers' realities, and that happens on the ground. Although the practice of agroforestry has existed for centuries, there is still much potential to scale up agroforestry in a way that better contributes to building inclusive and transformative food systems, including production that is more ecologically and economically sustainable, that improves livelihoods. The elements of agroforestry, which we will hear more about shortly, can serve as an important guide in these efforts. building the momentum of from the UN food systems last fall and other global efforts, such as, for example, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that is going on and is co-led by FAO and UNEP. This webinar responds to the call for applying transformative solutions for sustainable food systems and addressing the barriers to putting this transformation into action on the ground. I wish I could be able to be here more than just a few more minutes. I would really want to look forward to lively panel discussions and hearing more about our expert panelists' insights. So your insights and experiences on the challenges and opportunities for agroforestry, especially agroforestry that is better aligned with the elements of agroecology. So thank you from Forestry Division sides. We look forward to our very fruitful collaboration within the FAO and together with all of you that are participation in this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. Appreciate those welcoming remarks. Now I'd like to invite Edmundo Barrios to provide us with a bit of a foundation on what the 10 elements of agroecology are and how they apply to agroforestry. So Edmundo is an agricultural officer with our Plant Production and Protection Division at FAO, based here in Rome, Italy as well. He's a senior soil ecologist with more than 20 years of research for development experience and currently provides technical and policy-related advice on ecosystem management, soil health, and biodiversity that supports agroecological transitions to sustainable food and agricultural systems. Edmundo, I'd like you to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Maybe I'll call on Priya. Could you please share the screen? Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, wherever you are. It is a pleasure to speak today on the application of the 10 elements of agroecology to agroforestry in this NFO-NSP joint event. Next. A growing consensus highlights that the global food system is not delivering as needed on several key sustainable development indicators. Next. A number of recent global assessments show very worrying trends of continued land degradation and loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Next. Recent FAO reports also highlight that food insecurity and malnutrition remain a pervasive problem side by side with an obesity crisis, and estimates that about 30% of global food production is lost or wasted. Next. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the close interdependencies between ecosystem health, animal health, and human health, as well as the associated social and economic vulnerability. Next. The consensus on the urgent need for a global transition to agriculture and food systems that ensure food and nutrition security for all, while reversing environmental degradation and adapting to climate change, was ratified, as Tina just mentioned, at the UN Food System Summit last year. It also recognized that tackling such transitions requires long-term perspective and a holistic approach of the kind embodied in agroecology. And a coalition for food systems transformation through agroecology was a prominent outcome of the UN Food System Summit. Next. To assist countries in fostering transformative change, FAO developed the 10 elements of agroecology. Next. The 10 elements of agroecology resulted from a review and synthesis process conducted between 2015 and 2019, including the scientific literature and an extensive multi-actor global consultation through 2 international symposia and 7 regional dialogues on agroecology, which were then followed by a review by FAO governing bodies. Next. Recognizing that inherent complexity is commonly seen as a deterrent to action, FAO approved the 10 elements of agroecology as an analytical framework to support the design of differentiated paths for agriculture and food systems transformation. Next. Briefly, the elements diversity and co-creation and sharing of knowledge constitute foundational characteristics of agroecological systems and help to guide diversification choices aimed at creating synergies and minimizing trade-offs. Next. The elements efficiency and resilience are emerging properties of systems built upon the above three elements, and where recycling is a central agroecological practice. Next. The elements human and social values in culture and food traditions describe context features of agroecological systems. Next. The elements responsible governance in circular and solidarity economy describe the enabling environment as well as serving as aspirational goals. As we can see, the 10 elements are interlinked and interdependent. Each element is essential, reflecting the holistic and integrated nature of agroecology. Next. A 2020 peer review publication by FAO highlighted ways to operationalize the 10 elements of agroecology framework by identifying key entry points, followed by a next analysis prior to developing visual narratives using the 10 element icons. Next. The 10 elements framework highlights biodiversity, consumers, education, and governance as promising entry points to be a structured process that links all 10 elements to the stepwise design of prospective agroecological transitions. Next. Many world challenges have been largely addressed separately despite their known interconnectedness. Nexus analysis help us think about the nature of such interconnections and anticipate potential trade-offs, synergies, and complementarities when designing and prioritizing viable transformation options. Next. The third step is to develop visual narrative using the 10 element icons to describe plausible theories of transformative change. I will now illustrate this using agroforestry as a key example of nature-based solutions. Next. Agroforestry makes key contributions to agroecological transition to sustainable agriculture and food systems. The way trees are used and managed by men or women in agriculture can have important implications in the nutritional quality of food consumed and their adaptive capacity to climate change. Values in culture and food traditions have contributed for centuries to define which components are included in production systems. The planting of fruit trees by low-resource endowed farmers in Kenya, despite their limited and often decreasing farm size, highlights the important role played by agroforestry for improving household nutrition that is consistent with local culture and food traditions. Proven local practices combined with scientific knowledge provide the best guidance on what trees, crops, and livestock to include on the farm, where to place them, and how to manage them to build synergies, optimize complementarities, and minimize trade-offs. Next. Agricultural systems that are biologically diverse, like agroforestry, can make greater contributions to the stability and variety of ecological functions that sustain food production and other ecosystem services, like pollination, biological control of pests and diseases, and soil health. Experience developed locally and globally of useful tree-crop livestock combinations that encourage synergies can contribute to more diversified and nutritious diets and to enhance efficiency and the potential to adapt to an increasingly changing climate. When using existing resources more efficiently by enhanced biological processes and recycling, the use of pesticides can be minimized and the use of fertilizers optimized, both reducing the cost of production and the negative impacts on the environment. Recent studies in West Africa agroforests show that levels of shade tree cover of 30% or lower are required to optimize the trade-offs between production, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and biodiversity conservation goals. This underlines the critical importance of involving farmers and land managers at the onset of co-creation and sharing of knowledge to better identify relevant options that minimize trade-offs and are adapted to context variation. Agroecological transition, next please. Agroecological transitions demand the development of effective and innovative policy institutions. One back. Yeah, agroecological transitions demand the development of effective and innovative policies, institutions, and markets that enable and support transformative change. Agroforestry can help address consumer demands for safer and cleaner food through biodiversity and environment-friendly agricultural products. While green markets are becoming established as part of an increasing circular economy, agroforestry systems may be contributing to public food procurement success stories like the Brazilian school feeding program. Coconut-based agroforestry systems are being promoted in Senegal through an alliance government and the Kaidara Agroecology School. School graduates are provided with official titles of 1 hectare of municipal land, initially for 10 years, and an installation package to engage in agriculture using agroecological approaches and practices. This innovative youth employment model has shown that secure long-term access to land contributes to stabilize young families in the area and reducing youth migration while scaling up agroforestry systems. Next. The 10 elements framework recognizes that transformative change could be taking place simultaneously through many routes at multiple locations, starting from different baseline conditions and progressing at different rates. The diversity of trajectory options highlights its flexibility for adapting actions to local, national, and global context demands. Back. Agroforestry systems that apply the 10 elements of agroecology are more likely to be sustainable in the long term and maximize the potential benefits of the practice. Last one, please. I would like to conclude by highlighting that the 10 elements serve as the foundation for the normative and operational aspects of the Scaling Up Agroecology initiative, as well as to take the tool for assessing the multidimensional performance of agroecology. Agroecology and agroforestry are important components of two GEF7 impact programs: the Dryland Sustainable Landscapes, led by FAO, and the Food Systems Land Use and Restoration, also known as FOLUR, led by the Bank. With this, I pass the floor back to you, Elaine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edmundo, for that very interesting and elaborate presentation. So we'd like to go into our panel, and I'd like to introduce all of our wonderful panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Ronicorn Chiraganon, who is a senior strategic advisor with RECOFT. He has been working in the community-based natural resource management sector since the 1980s, and his work has ensured sustainable natural resource management and fair distribution of benefits through participatory approaches. Welcome, Ron. Next, I'd like to introduce Amina Aden Maalim, who is a female research scientist currently working with the National Forestry Research Institute in Kenya, also known as KEFRI. She is the only female forestry research scientist in the northeastern region of Kenya and provides support to the largest pastoral population in Kenya. Welcome, Amina. We also have Luis Orozco Aguilar, who is the current Deputy Director for Research and Innovation for the LWR MOCA project. Luis is a dynamic researcher and practitioner of tropical agroforestry with perennial crops, cacao and coffee. Welcome, Luis. We also have Ravi Prabhu, who is the Director of Innovation, Investment, and Impact at C4ICRAF. He is an accomplished scientist who has engaged in multidisciplinary research and action in forested landscapes for almost 20 years. Ravi, I know you're having connection issues. There you are. Great. Thank you. But yeah, if your connection is not supporting video, we understand, but hopefully it's stable enough. And last but not least, we have Ulrich Appel, who's a senior environmental specialist in the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, with expertise on land degradation, neutrality, and sustainable forest management. He coordinates GEF's global portfolio and of projects and programs on sustainable land management and landscape restoration financing. Welcome, Ulrich. So my first question will be to Ron. And Ron, knowledge management, of course, is an integral part of any agroforestry system. And many communities have been practicing agroforestry for generations. How can we better highlight and integrate local, traditional, and/or indigenous knowledge into capacity development and extension services?
All right, thanks a lot, Elaine, and nice to see you all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. First of all, I'd like to appreciate the FAO work on these 10 elements of the agroforestry framework. Well, it's very exciting to learn more and then see how it works on the ground. Well, back to your question, Elaine, I have to say that even though I have been working or promoting the practice of agroforestry in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Africa for over decades, but I cannot claim myself as an expert on agroforestry because I'm still learning how to make the agroforestry work in the local context. So that's why in the introduction that you gave so far, it didn't mention at all about agroforestry. So I have to say that I'm not the agroforestry expert. Then back to your questions, how to integrate the local knowledge and traditional practices. I think nowadays a lot of people recognize the agroforestry to serve different purposes. Yeah, like Edmundo mentions about even frame the agroforestry as part of the nature-based solution. And even now we're talking about climate change adaptation. So agroforestry can serve and bring in the resilience of the local people. Well, the key point of the discussion that I'd like to bring it here. Well, agroforestry can serve multiple purposes, but how well we are aware of those multiple purposes. And there are so many stakeholders involved in agroforestry design and practices. And even I think in the introduction part that Tilner and also Edmundo mentions about agroforestry for land use management. So how well we understand the key objective, what we'd like to achieve, yeah, when we apply agroforestry. So how the local people expect, what the forester or agriculturist or even land use manager would want to expect from agroforestry. So I think that is the key that brings us to understand more where we are working and how can we understand the local context. When I refer to the local context, I refer to the cultural, social, ecological, and economic context, how well we are aware of those contexts and bring those contexts into the agroforestry design. When we talk about capacity building or capacity development, I observe among the ASEAN member state or among the government, among the state members, they're still highlighting the capacity gap on the species selection, the design introduction, without understanding more about those contexts that I referred earlier. So how well we can bring those practitioners to understand the landscape context, looking back, what are the market demands? What are the social and economic issues there? And what are the assets the landscape could bring about? It's not only about understanding the soil structure or soil quality and condition and so on to select the species. but understand what are the issues that they like to address. Yeah, and bring in, as Edmundo mentioned, agroforestry as the nature-based solution. What
Great.
RICOP is working on this on the capacity building. We are not only talking about agroforestry design. We help people to apply participatory approach, farmer field school, multi-stakeholder processes, conflict management, sustainable land use management. So that's why I cannot claim myself as a agroforestry expert, but we bring all other elements to achieve those 10 elements that you mentioned earlier.
Great. Thank
Ellen.
you so much, Ron. I really appreciate it. And we'll be digging in a little bit more into, what are the capacity needs that are being requested by these various stakeholders. So stay tuned. We'll ask you that in a moment. Next, I have a question for Amina. Hi, Amina.
Yes,
so
Elaine.
enhancing systems components interactions is a crucial objective of agroforestry and agroecology, as has been raised by some of the other colleagues, but it's often the management of interactions where there are the biggest skills and knowledge gaps. Agro-silvopastoral seems to be especially illustrative of a system where active management is crucial, but where we have limited guidance and support for these systems. So how can we support farmers and pastoralists to better actively manage resources so that ecosystem services are enhanced at multiple scales, particularly using trees? Obviously, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. Hi, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. In simple terms, let me start by defining agro-silvopastoral systems, which being the type of a land use system that includes the woody component, which can be trees and or shrubs, together with crops, which are integrated into livestock production systems. Essentially, they are associated to a model of production and conservation that are centered on silvicultural practices and agricultural activities, and they therefore assist in maintaining ecosystem integrity as well as supporting our well-being. In many parts of the world, the system plays a crucial economic, social, and environmental role, and they are mainly for improving the environmental sustainability and resilience of the wider landscapes. And it has really helped in improving the resilience and the soil conditions of as they play a critical role in reducing vulnerability and increasing crop resilience, thus helping communities better tackle climate risks, also provided food and other essential materials in periods of food insecurity, and they also buffer the soils, preventing soil and water erosion, protection from fire outbreaks and overgrazing, and also reestablishment of the vegetation cover through various avenues, whether it is artificial natural regeneration or planting itself. To answer your question, I think emphasis on the need for the integration. Why are we, first of all, integrating? And we need to be conscious of the required silvicultural practices that integration requires, and what are your expected outputs? Why do we need to establish this system? What do you expect to get from this system? And what exactly do you intend to integrate within the system will also define the output. In the drylands, for example, you need to have trees and crops that are supposed to be well adapted to those changing environmental conditions and provide essential goods and environmental services. And the silvicultural operations being provided on the trees should not be negatively affecting the other components. And we also need to use simplified and customized management plans that match the user's needs and help in maximization of the output. And we also have to bring coordination between the different sectors that are also working in that integration covers. It can be the agriculture, the forestry, the energy, the water, so that we understand how can we maximize on this small land and put all these elements together. And lastly, we can also increase knowledge co-creation and sharing platforms through exchange programs. Right now, climate shocks are becoming recurrent, and the different land users are trying to have alternative livelihood sources, and that is kind of bringing in new people to adopt certain lifestyles that they were not used to. And a good example is the pastoral community that is right now trying to look at different investment opportunities, and a good avenue has been agroforestry, where right now we are looking at how do we plant fodder species and bring in some pasture grasses, and as well as also plant some crops and try to see how they benefit in the various seasons that the year has. Thank you, Elaine.
Great, thank you, Amina. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about agroforestry and drylands, which is a increasingly, for lack of a better expression, hot topic. So thank you. So Luis, we've already started discussing a little bit about, context, how context matters. And when we talk about context, obviously trade-offs, especially for longer term returns, is an inevitable part of adopting agroforestry. And agroforestry crops have not historically benefited from the same kind of agricultural subsidies that have made other production systems viable. So how can we better support farmers in managing these initial trade-offs and reduce the perceived risks of adopting agroforestry? And are there any tools that can be used for managing these trade-offs?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to take part of this seminar. And I think there's a very interesting and tricky question that I need to answer. But for me, trade-off is managing the interaction between trees and other components within agroforestry system, which is for me the foundation of this kind of science and practice. So it's really difficult to manage trade-off, but it can be done depending on the context and depending on the resources and depending on the environment where agroforestry is taking place. Nowadays, farmers face several trade-offs when adopting or adapting agroforestry systems in general, and when growing perennial crops in particular. I would like to say that farmer needs to act towards crop intensification without compromising plant diversity or increasing cultivated area. So one way to support farmers for me is to face this reality is to work with them and provide them high quality planting material for agroforestry component, not only for the main crop, namely corn, bean, or grass, but also for fruit trees, timber trees, and firewood trees. Sometimes I think within development project, we fail in providing improved planting material only for the short or medium term crop, but trees improve high quality planting material for trees can provide greater amount of products and services to farmers sooner when best and sweetest species are planted and managed. So when you look at forestry plantation, for example, or fruit plantation, like monocrops, you look at well-shaped trees producing nice fruits, nutritious fruits, or you look at the thick tree growing with a perfect shape architecture that can be combined in agroforestry system as well. But at the other side, you have probably small farmers still working and growing trees that haven't been part of this selection or breeding program. So we need to incorporate better planting material for trees that are incorporated or combining into annual or perennial crops. And a second way to support farmers for me is to seek and secure incentive. This could be technical assistance, farm inputs, or payment for environmental services such as carbon sequestration, water supply, or even biodiversity conservation. These incomes, this payment for environmental services might alleviate the farmers' waiting period and provide key revenues for a given agroforestry system. So far, we have the methodologies, we have research and publish a lot of data, a lot of information. We also have local and country experiences that tell us that it's possible to do so. The matter is how to scale up these experiences, how to serve and offer incentives to help farmers incorporate and manage trees and tackle this waiting period that they're facing. And also for decision makers and projects is really challenging, and how to secure this green and voluntary markets willing to take part of payment for environmental services in the long term. That's the challenge we need to tackle, and that's the way we need to work. Finally, I would like to make, we need to make sure that we guide farmers' organization to improve the commercial link between farmers, tree products, fruits, firewoods, and any wood and services that comes from the agroforestry system needs to be linked to a potential market. So in that way, farmers are willing to plant more trees, better manage trees, and also to have secure some revenues from their farms. But we need to improve and secure those market linkages that are absent at the moment.
Great, thank you, Luis. And we'll try and dig a little deeper into what those could look like. Speaking of kind of creating enabling environments and how to foster and how to enable agroforestry and scale this up. Ravi, ICRAF has played an integral role in supporting India in the development of its national agroforestry policy. What do you believe are some of the success factors and key challenges for the development and implementation of national agroforestry policies and/or strategies?
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks for the invitation. So I think it's actually really rather simple. It begins with understanding that agroforestry is a sector or a part of two sectors that actually can contribute to the economy, contribute to welfare. So recognizing that agroforestry has something to offer. And that is not a trivial question, because agroforestry often disappears between the cracks of agriculture and forestry departments or ministries. So in India's case, I think this was, despite the very long history, and in all our countries, agroforestry has a long history, but it tends to be hidden, cryptic, ignored. And in India's case, this was the first step that they recognized the importance of the sector, and then discussed that recognizing the sector in a policy would unleash opportunities that didn't exist before. And I'm happy to speak to those. So that's the most important thing, that the challenge that was faced before, that there was a lot of technical descriptions of agroforestry, but it wasn't recognized as an important economic and policy context, simply because they felt it was either handled by forestry, less by agriculture, but actually it fell between the two. And once that was recognized, it was possible to build momentum around the policy. Similar stories emerge from other countries that we have been working with on agroforestry policy. However, they had the benefit of looking, as it were, over India's shoulder. So Bangladesh, and especially Nepal, that has an agroforestry policy now, immediately recognized that there were efficiencies and gains to be had from a policy, and focused the policy exactly on those issues. Subsequently, of course, agroforestry now plays an important role in the NDCs, in UNCCD commitments, in CBD commitments, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of leverage that we are gaining.
Hi, Ravi. We seem to be losing your connection a little bit, but I think a lot of what you said was was very valuable, and we'll see if maybe your connection improves further on, so you can re-elaborate what we failed to capture at the moment. So speaking of scaling up, this requires a certain amount of financing. So Ulrich, seeing how finance for agroforestry remains challenging, how can the GEF as a financing institution support agroforestry, and how does agroforestry fit within GEF's mandate to tackle pressing environmental problems?
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. And first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me start with explaining a little bit GEF's mandate, which is to generate global environmental benefits through our investments. And as a financing mechanism of the 3 Rio Conventions, we fund projects that help countries to fulfill their obligations towards the conventions. Now, agroforestry is actually cross-cutting objectives of all the 3 conventions of biodiversity, of fighting against land degradation and climate change. So this is actually then also a very important value proposition for the GEF to generate multiple benefits through investments in agroforestry, because we can create benefits in all 3 focal areas of biodiversity, land degradation, and climate change through sustainable land management interventions. And specifically with your question on upscaling, the GEF is using our concept of what we call integrated approaches to try to upscale. And this is often not a question specifically of financial inputs only. It is very often the enabling framework, some of the conditions that need to be in place for upscaling, be it policy coherence, favorable policies, avoiding perverse incentives, getting the financing streams right so that we do not have subsidies that harm agroforestry, and involving the private sector is another enabling condition by, for example, what we do at the GEF, de-risking some of the private sector investments by taking first loss or making some of the more risky investments in some of the emerging funds that support agroforestry. And then another example is targeting especially small and medium enterprises that they have access to markets and participate in the value chain production of some of the commodities. So yeah, just let me close by one concrete example, so that we invest in sustainable land management. And we have just submitted the report to the upcoming UNCCD, and in the last 4 years we have invested actually 36% of our portfolio goes into sustainable land management. It's about $180 million in projects that support agro biodiversity, agricultural diversification, sustainable land management, climate smart agriculture in those agricultural landscapes. But it's always in integrated approaches where we try to create multiple benefits, and especially also socio-economic benefits for the local communities and civil society to be involved as an important stakeholders. So let me stop here, and happy to continue digging deeper in the question and answer.
Great, thank you so much, Ulrich. And just give me a minute while I add the other panelists to the spotlight. And I have actually a follow-up question specifically to Amina. You mentioned that stakeholders require simplified and customized management in terms of guidance, which is a bit in contradiction to how we often sell agroforestry, and that it's about diversification. So do you have some, and I think it's possible that these aren't mutually exclusive things, but it is sort of mixed messaging. So do you have some examples of how more simplified, customized management is important? And I actually think maybe some of the other panelists may have some thoughts on that afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. We do have different land users, and we do have researchers. We do have people who are directly doing the farming itself, and we do have us researchers who go and interact with them. It reaches a point where science comes with prescriptions. This is how an adder cropping should be. This is how a certain practice should be. But when you put it on the ground, it's not like so easy for the farmer to digest. So it would be good to have guides that are very much user friendly. Like if it's pastoralists, we design one for them, and you kind of identify the key silvicultural management even if it's simplified using pictorials, or even them themselves drawing and then later on picking it up and using it in the different dissemination materials that you have. And we have in Kenya, specifically in Kibwezi, we have a farmer who has gotten presidential recognition for the work that he was doing in agro-silvipastoral system. He has a lot of land and Melia plantation, Melia volkensai, which is a timber species. And he has grass species that he's producing, and he has his livestock that he's keeping. And he has integrated, various indigenous water harvesting technologies. So you see, in the different seasons of the year, he's able to get a specific, output from his production system. And when you go to him, there's a way he would explain it to you in a very simple way. And I believe if we would like people to take up agroforestry and this, agroecology, it would be better if things are simplified for enhancing adoption and scaling up. Yeah.
Thanks, Amina. It's great. And also, I have a follow-up for Ravi. One of our participants was interested in better understanding what exactly were the steps used to foster ministerial cooperation in India? Because as you mentioned, agroforestry often falls between governance gaps, between agriculture and forestry. So how was India able to achieve this? And perhaps that was something you were mentioning it towards the end and then we lost you. So it'd be great if you could touch on that.
I'm not sure I completely caught that because the connection is still very wobbly. I think the most important thing to get the agroforestry policy through at that time, and the continued support that we have today across two governments, was the support from the prime ministers, the previous ones and the present prime minister. So you need champions at all levels and an understanding that agroforestry is important. I just spent the whole day with the Indian Planning Commission talking about transformation of Indian agriculture, because the recognition that we cannot continue the way we are continuing at the moment with green revolution agriculture. So the day was devoted to agroecology, climate resilient agriculture and natural farming. But agroforestry popped up quite a lot as well. And I think what we're starting to see is a recognition that the more we think in silos, the less we take advantage of the opportunities we've got. So I would suspect that a lot of the cooperation comes simply from inside. A number of the ministers who spoke, 6 ministers, chief ministers, 2 central government ministers, governor, etc., all were practicing for farmers in one way or the other. So there was personal experience as well. And they're seeing the limits of conventional agriculture and the opportunities that arise out of agroforestry, and particularly the recognition that we need to rebuild our soil organic carbon. We need to do something about greenhouse gases, and most importantly for India, manage water in these systems. So I think it's a lot of different issues who can articulate clearly, understandably, and believably what the advantages are of the institutional and policy incentives that are required to reach the potential of agroforestry. Between 2015 and 2019, Indian tree cover by 1.8 is credited to agroforestry, simply because farmers were then allowed under the policy to cut and harvest trees that they previously couldn't. So they had an incentive now to also grow. One doesn't really think about in the first instance. Agroforestry covers about 26.3 million hectares of land across India, and in the wheat poplar system is one of the most profitable agricultural systems in the country. So it is this sort of multifaceted understanding of what agroforestry can do and has started to do that is increasingly getting the support that agroforestry, and most importantly, agroforestry as part of an agroecological transformation of the country that we are seeing. It's rather a large sector now. It's about $25 billion per year, and most of it most benefits go to smallholders. So if we're not talking about small parcels of land and tucked away in corners of the country, this is mainstream. 70% of the country's timber comes from agroforestry.
Great, thanks, Ravi. Very interesting. And I'm sure lots of countries are looking at India as an example, and I know several other countries are either currently working on policies or strategies. So in fact, maybe I'd like Ron to maybe expand on that a little bit, because you've done a lot of participatory approaches. How have you found agroforestry, and how do you promote that amongst multiple stakeholders or get multiple stakeholder engagement when it comes to agroforestry issues?
Well, I think it's similar to what Eminar mentions. Most of the agroforestry promotion came from the descriptive design, descriptive farming, or introducing the farming design from researcher. I would say that, okay, well, rather than come with the preset or pre-descriptive of agroforestry design, then probably have to work closely with farmer. Even I agree with David in terms of developing the guideline, how to apply the 10 elements on the ground. Probably we might need to work with farmers because they are the one who bring the context there. So, well, I agree with Prabhu, Ravi, that now agroforestry is not only applying at the small plot, but more or less applying at the big scale, at the landscape level. But anywhere, we have to understand what are the landscape management objective would look like. Because within one landscape, there are multiple interests. One may be interested in income generation. One may be interested in watershed or soil conservation. One may be interested in carbon or forest restoration and so on. So how can we bring these people together to identify or having a common vision within the landscape, and then how local people can contribute? I think one of the questions that you asked about the trade-off, for me, I would not call as a trade-off. I would say a compromisation. Yeah, because every intervention can bring both negative and positive impact. It's just a matter how can we manage and then getting or maximizing the positive result from the intervention. So that's why we have to discuss with the landscape stakeholder and see how we can work together. And there is no need to repeat the same farming system over the working landscape, but try to understand what the farmer need and what the other stakeholder interested, and then see how can we work together within the landscape. So that's why we are not working promoting the concept itself, but we're working around on the multi-stakeholder processes, conflict management, negotiation process, gender and social inclusion within the design of agroforestry. So this is something extension service need to look for.
Great, thank you, Ron. And I think obviously all of these issues require kind of strategic financing, et cetera. So maybe I'd like to follow up with a question to both Luis and Ulrich. What kind of financial incentives and commitments would be required to transform to a more integrated food system such as agroforestry, including production value chains and markets? And maybe I'll start with asking Ulrich to respond, to get a bit of a more of a global, higher level perspective, and then Luis, I'll ask you to come in from a more national or project-based approach.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the first opportunity and option we have heard actually from Ravi already. If the agroforestry, agroecology is mainstreamed, and if the government is really putting the right frameworks in place, including tax incentives, including getting the domestic financing streams right, then this is a huge favorable condition for upscaling agroforestry. Now there are some countries that are not that advanced and need support and help, and there it's always important from Jeff's perspective to see this not in isolation, agroforestry, but to see all the multiple benefits that can be created and think about how this can be pursued in integrated cross-sectoral approaches, in larger landscape approaches. And funding is very often available, surprisingly, for larger initiatives. This is what often what you hear from the private sector funds. They are looking for what they call bankable projects that have the larger size and where all the conditions are in place to cover larger areas and to bring larger investments on the ground. Sometimes it's even more difficult to get smaller investments, but of course there are also opportunities through small grants programs, through a lot of philanthropic and smaller sized investments to have successful demonstrations on the ground that can then later be upscaled based on demonstrated success to larger areas.
Great, thanks, Ulrich. Luis?
Yeah, thanks. I will talk about the MOCA project experience. We are a regional project working in 6 countries, 4 countries in Central America and 2 countries in South America, Peru and Ecuador. And we are working closely with 20,000 cacao farmers. So providing technical assistance to that amount of farmers is a huge challenge, right? And neither the government or private sector or our technical staff have the capacity to do so. What we discuss and we agree on the ground, talking directly with stakeholders and practitioners, and how to better cover this amount of farmers. And we comes out with a matching grant scheme that combine financial resources, combine technical staff, and even knowledge from the private industry, the government, and our own technical staff. So in that way, we set up a number of farmers to be attended. the topics to be delivered, and also the targets and the overall goal of that partnership. What I'm trying to say is that that's the reality in Latin America. Extension services are lacking, are absent, or there is not resources to attend the whole community of farmers practicing agroforestry. So we need to partner the private industry. We need to partner the investor. We need to partner the government and other projects in order to attend that amount of farmers in a timely and with quality services as well. And we also figured out that research and research outputs are not on farmers' hands fully. So we come out with a set of mechanisms and platform and also tools to share this knowledge from the research community to the technical staff to farmers. And we have a set of tools and materials to share that knowledge and practice that knowledge at farm levels. I'm talking about fact sheets, I'm talking about newsletters, I'm talking about community cinema. We also have a cacao mobile app that farmer can access without internet. We have online seminars. We also have applied research, experimental plots, and we also have a co-creation of knowledge with farmers. This is something that was talked earlier. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to tackle that. We need to help farmers from different angles and take advantage of the context and the resources and the know-hows that you have in place in order to better provide technical assistance to farmers. In that way, agroforestry will be better implemented and agroforestry system will last longer at the landscape level.
Thanks, Luis. So as we're kind of getting, I realize we've only got about 10 or so minutes left, and obviously there's a lot more issues to address more in depth, and hopefully this is just the beginning of conversations and we can continue to have webinars in the future. But I'd actually like a question for all of the panelists. You know, we're talking about scaling up agroforestry for agroforestry to better recognize, address livelihood and income generation issues, so that way agroforestry doesn't lead to more work and less income. But you know, you all come from different organizations, different backgrounds. So just out of curiosity, how do you think FAO as an organization that often deals with science policy practice interface, how do you think we could best assist you and similar implementation partners in helping to scale up agroforestry? And perhaps I will start with the original order and go to Ron first to respond.
I think we have to understand when we talk about scaling up. So what are the benefits the farmers would get? What are the incentives? What are the interests that they like to scale up? So I assume that when we talk about scaling up on the size, meaning that, okay, well, they have to understand the demand. And when we talk about the multiple benefit from agroforestry, they have to understand whether or not they can sell their products. Yeah, otherwise, yeah, if they can grow coffee, cacao, or whatever the agroforestry species, and then the lack of market demand. So that is one thing that somehow we have to work together with extension agencies, yeah, understanding the market demand and see how we can meet the agroforestry practices with market demand. I see some cases that the private sector can work together with local farmers. Yeah, like big companies produce cacao or coffee. Then they can mix crops with coffee and cacao or some other commodities that they can get their regular supply to their business supply chain. So that is something that we have to work, and then that I can see potential of scaling up. But as I said earlier, we have to understand what are the incentives for the farmers to scale up and who can support them to scale up. And the private sector can play very critical roles in terms of bring in the market analysis and meeting the supply side from the agroforestry practices.
Great, thank you, Ron. Amina, would you like to answer the question next?
First, I think Ron has provided a very good answer. Identifying the audience or the target stakeholders would be the first what do you call task to do. And if a certain agroforestry practice or is supposed to be taken up, you need to incentivize, and that I really agree with Ron, because apparently I am working with farmers who are doing farming along the River Tana catchment. And it's almost, people have encroached the river, and now we are trying to do as much as we are promoting the rehabilitation and restoration of that river, degraded riverbank. How do we bring in bamboo to the farmers? But we cannot just give them the bamboo alone. We have to give them fruit trees and grasses, because they keep livestock on the side. They keep livestock on the side, so we need to kind of motivate them to have something that they know they will get something out of, and we also get our data, and they also get to learn with us how this bamboo can also be beneficial to them socially, ecologically, and economically. And also trying to link whatever the farmers are producing to the not only external markets, within even the local market, try to create those chains, and also try to find out model farmers or model farms, so that you do an in-country exchange program. That's how farmers can be very much helpful in scaling up, or what do you call practices, or agroforestry practices. And we have seen that be working wonders for us. Take farmers, identify model farmers, and what do you call, appreciate them for the commitment the commitment they have, and the hard work they are putting in ensuring that the lessons, whatever they are doing, is appreciated and has been successful, and they're now being taken to other farm parts of the country, or even to be brought in even the World Forest Congress, where they can share experiences. Apparently, we researchers, we tend to take knowledge from the farmers who are doing the hard work, and we try to get recognition for that. And we are trying to change the narrative. We, the young people right now, are trying to change that narrative and recognize the farmers who are putting in the efforts, and also, if possible, even if it's a technology, try naming them after it, and they would feel really being as part of the project, the whole process. And I think that would really encourage adoption and scaling up, and also what do you call that acknowledgement and ownership of whatever that is being put into practice. Thank you, Elaine.
Thanks, Amina. And yeah, I think ownership, having a sense of ownership and agency, your last point, is really important if we want to see agroforestry scaled up. Luis, do you want to answer the question next?
Yes, I would like to talk about two specific points. I will say that agroforestry, in order to be mainstream at national or farm level, and we need to tackle the issue of transaction cost of taking advantage of trees in the farm. What I'm saying is, when you talk with the farmers and advise farmers to plant timber trees or firewood trees, there is a legislation about that advice that limit the benefits of planting and managing trees, or even selling trees. So we could have like a national legislation that is the framework to promote agroforestry. Or we need to go a bit down on the ladder to work with local authorities, trying to minimize the transaction costs. So farmers can see trees as a benefit, can see trees as a banking account, not as a transaction cost. That is important to work at the local level. So the legislation minimizes transaction costs in order to have the maximum benefits from trees. And I will also say that mainstreaming agroforestry at university level. I'm talking about, again, from the Central American experience. When you look at the university curricula, there's no agroforestry word in the curricula. Some specific topics, some specific research topic that look like agroforestry, but we are not teaching and sharing the knowledge of agroforestry or the advances of agroforestry in practice. So I think it's important if we can influence universities and to incorporate agroforestry teaching and practice within the curricula, so we will have better equipped technical staff to support farmers in the short term as well.
Thanks, Luis, and thanks for bringing up two very important pieces of well, two gaps in a lot of ways: technical knowledge, as well as better understanding the transaction costs, and what also goes to Ron's point of kind of optimization, or how we deal with the compromise. Ravi, if you could respond to the question as well, please. Ravi, I'm wondering if it's worthwhile turning off your video to reduce the bandwidth. Or Rick, why don't we go to you first and see if Ravi's connection improves?
Yes, yeah, very briefly, I wanted to say that FAO's leadership is, of course, very much appreciated in keeping awareness about this topic. You know, agroforestry has been around for many decades already, but we need to keep the awareness up and continue to raise the importance of all the benefits that can be created. And I saw questions in the chat box about carbon and trees. Yes, of course, this is one important benefit of agroforestry, and I think all our projects, all the institutions now evaluate and monitor carbon benefits, because also it can be contribute even to income and to revenues through payments for ecosystem services. And I think really agroforestry is kind of the low-hanging fruit compared to other nature-based solutions, because really, if you do it in the right way, you can have these win-win-win solutions with a limited amount of trade-offs. And we should continue bringing this to the attention that you can create all those environmental benefits plus the local socio-economic benefits, increasing yields. So agroforestry is kind of like the arena and solution we should really focus our efforts on. It's linked to food systems. Everyone needs food, is interested in food, is linked to so many socio-cultural systems. So it's really a great area to work with, and we should all continue placing emphasis on it.
Thank you so much, Ulrich. And I see we've got Ravi back. His connection seems to be good. So Ravi, I'll ask you to be the last panelist to respond to the question.
You're going to have to repeat the question, Elaine.
Absolutely.
I'm not usually as tongue-tied as this, but
Ravi, maybe turn off your video and see if that helps with the connection, because I'm not sure if you can still hear me. Okay, I think we've lost Ravi again. And
hear you, but I again missed the question if you asked.
Sure. So the question was basically, agroforestry, we need to better recognize livelihood and income generation in order to scale up. And what do you think organizations like FAO or even like ICRAF can do to better support implementing partners to help scale up agroforestry? Ravi, are you there? Okay. I think we've lost Ravi, unfortunately, due to poor connection. And for the purposes of time, because I see that we are actually already at the end of the webinar, I would like to invite Jingwan Xia, our Director of the Plant Protection and Production Division here at headquarters in FAO, to provide some closing remarks.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, facilitator. And the distinguished guest, dear colleague, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to make a close remark on this insightful webinar jointly organized by FAO Forestry Division and NFO and the Plant Production and the Protection Division, NSP. I'm very sure you all agree with me that this webinar have been well designed and also well organized, starting from an overview presentation on ecological transition, and then followed with constructive discussion on policy, science, and practice in agroforestry among five distinguished panelists from various disciplines and global, regional, and national level. So I can say this webinar is excellent. As you know, FAO is committed to support the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agro-food system for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, leaving no one behind. We all agree that the need for agricultural and food system transformation to ensure sustainable food for all. Farming in harmony with nature is imperative in delivering on commitment to improve biological diversity, to restore natural ecosystem, and in making progress on the SDG. The FAO, the Forestry Division, and the Production Protection Division brought together different actors to reflect on the agroforestry as an example of agroecology in practice, contributing to pathway for redesigning food system around sustainability principle and institutional innovation. The discussion have shown us that agroforestry is an valuable and nature-based solution to promote better production, improve nutritional security, and build resilient community through biodiversity, efficient use, and recycling of resource. This presents an important contribution for food and agricultural system. They are environmentally sustainable, economically viable, and socially equitable. So this shows 4 key elements. First, the importance of recognizing and managing trade-off in agroforestry. Second, the success factor and the key challenge in natural agroforestry policy or strategy. Third, the need for extension service and embrace no co-creation with farmers in design of agroforestry intervention. And number 4, limited attention that has been paid to financial viability when promoting agroforestry. Dear colleague, ladies and gentlemen, After today's rich discussion, we can unite around the following three major conclusions. Number one, agroforestry system that apply the 10-element agroecology are more likely to be sustainable in the long term and maximize potential benefit of the practice. This requires, however, to foster creation and sharing of knowledge through participatory research and innovation. Second, although agroforestry is the full embrace agroecology, represent an important pathway in the transition to transformative change and a sustainable food system. Lack of enabling conditions such as tenure, extension service, insensitive and access to market remaining the biggest barrier to control the successful uptake and scaling up. The third, to promote scaling up, to promote and scale up agroforestry, there is a need to demonstrate the potential positive return on the investment of agroforestry system and to support market for agroforestry based products and service that contribute to a safer and cleaner food product produced through biodiversity and environment-friendly production system. I thank all of you for your active engagement and the positive contribution. I'm looking forward to meet you all in the next forum for promoting agroforestry and the agroecological approach at a different scale. Thank you all. Over to you, facilitator. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Xia. And thank you to our speaker and our panelists and to all of our participants who have stayed with us throughout this webinar, including beyond the scheduled time. We really appreciate it. If there's one thing to take away from this webinar, it's that there is a wealth of discussion that needs to be had surrounding how to apply agroecology and agroforestry. And hopefully this is merely the beginning of such conversations and we can continue to have them.
Elaine, you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry about that. So if you want to know more about FAO's work in agroecology and agroforestry, please visit the websites that have been posted in the chat. Please also feel free to connect with us to ask us more questions and to also encourage us to do more of these webinars and discussions based on your themes. I'd also like to say that in July of this year will be the World Agroforestry Congress, which is based in Quebec City, but there you can attend online as well. So please, if you're interested in these topics, consider joining that conference where a lot of these topics will be discussed in more detail. So with that, again, thank you everyone for joining us at this webinar, and we hope that we can continue having these discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.